morning, everybody. And actually, when I was invited to speak in IACA, in JoCo, it was for tomorrow's session, which I hope some of you will attend. It's a workshop about healthcare financing. But since I'm coming, and I love to talk, so I made sure to tell all the other sections that I'm coming. So I ended up having speaking yesterday, the day before yesterday, and I heard that I'm booked also for Saturday as well. There is a very famous philosopher in the Arab world says the favor is not paid by the speaker, the favor is paid by the listener, because a speaker can speak by himself in the forest and nobody's listening, no added value. So thank you for being here. I'm recording my session because sometimes I say something political and gets me in trouble. And I don't really care, but I like to have some recording this way to make sure that everything is stated correctly. In today's, there are two things that I think that are of value to you. All other things that are not of value to you is value to me, because I'm trying to solicit volunteers to help me finish this project. So the objective of the paper today, of the presentation today, is really to get some people excited to say, oh, we would like to be part of your team. The 2 points that are important that I think we have the obligation to talk about is one thing that the general public, and including politicians, I include them from the general public, they look at indicators of the word life expectancy, and they say 75 or 78 and so on and so forth. And then retirement age is 65, let's say. They think, oh, okay, you are going to be funding for 40 years to benefit for 15 years. So most politicians, this is their view. Not very, very few politicians are being taught that what we talk about life expectancy is that life expectancy at birth. So when we say somebody is life expectancy is 75 in a particular country, we don't tell him, the guy that he became 79, that he should have died 3-4 years ago. The life expectancy at retirement of the same country that has a life expectancy of 75, the life expectancy at 65 is most likely 80, 85. This is a very important thing that actuarial profession have to educate the policymaker when they are talking about Social Security. The liability is attached by far longer than what the average man thinks so. So this is one thing I urge you guys to keep in mind. Now, since we are talking about healthcare, and of course life expectancy is very interesting when we talk about healthcare, there are two schools of thought, that if you are healthy, you are living long, and whether we are deferring the big expense for the last couple of years before we die, or we are going to be incurring expense throughout the last years we are living longer. This is a lot of studies that have to be done on that regard. But irrespective of that, I'm very proud to say that about 10 years ago, or a little bit longer, we were able to get our hands on a very extensive database, which is a German medical expenses. And we found out that medical inflation is age sensitive. We all know that the average cost of healthcare for a person is 40 compared to the person based on 50 is different, but it is age sensitive. We didn't realize that medical inflation is also age sensitive. Having said that, we modeled about a person who's 60 today and a person who's 60 10 years from today, and compare the person who's 40 today and the person who's 40 later on, the growth of this, the same age and the same year of service as same age group we are comparing, there is a different medical inflation. That was frightening discovery. It means when we talk about medical inflation being 3% or 5% or whatever it is, we cannot apply it without taking into consideration what is the age groups in the future that we are talking about. So this is the basis of our scary situation of the future. Also, to give you a small background, about 30 years ago, the World Bank was looking at the Lebanese social security system for the public service. The public service at that time, their payroll was 18% of the total government budget. And then we were looking at the pension and projecting the pension. We realized that within 15 years, and this is now already occurred, our finding became a reality, is almost 20% of the budget. So we have salaries 20% of the budget, pensions 20% of the budget, and that was a major reason to reform the social security system. My work with healthcare started when I was doing an internship when I was still in college in Detroit with the Blue Cross Blue Shield. And the actuary that I worked under, I worked many, many layers under him, he was a very senior German-American actuary. And I was fascinated by him. By the way, this is why I wear bow ties, because he used to wear bow ties, and I always wanted to be like him. I took permission from him when I was finishing my internship. I said, "Do you permit me to wear a bow tie so I remember you the rest of my life?" And since then, the only time I wear a tie is when I get married. So I wear a bow tie, and many people call me Monsieur Papillon. So, at that time, I realized really healthcare is different. Unfortunately, there were not many jobs in healthcare internationally. You were either a life actuary or a pension actuary or a casualty actuary. So the first few years of my life were in insurance. And then until I realized somebody was looking in healthcare, I jumped back into what I considered my roots. And since then, I've been very, very much involved in healthcare. About a year ago, the chairman of IAA, who is, of course, an actuary, he delivered a paper on implicit pension debt. And he is moderating in the room next door to us. At that time, after the minute the webinar finished, I called him up. And he thought I'm calling him up to congratulate him. I told him the implicit pension debt is very much right now in debate. In many countries, they put it on their national accounts, that debt, at least off balance sheet, but they put it on the accounts. Many countries, they don't recognize it, like in America, they don't want to talk about implicit debt. But I want to talk about implicit health debt. And this is how the whole project started. I told him I want to learn from you what should be done to get a paper to IMF to start talking about implicit health debt. I recruited an actuary. She's a PhD actuary graduate from Belgium, and I put her on the project, and she's been working about a year ago, for a year, and she has a team, and we are working on this paper that I'm presenting for you today. So now this is the pitch, the sales pitch. I'd like somebody who gets excited to say, I would like to volunteer on this paper. Implicit health debt differs from one country to another based on what kind of financing system they apply. countries that they work on contributions is different than countries that work on taxes. And different some countries that unfortunately work on donations. And this is the biggest problem that I faced throughout my career the past 10, 15 years. And politicians usually I don't think they are short-sighted, they are very smart. And the ignorant are the people. So it's very easy to promise them something they don't have to deliver themselves. So on their campaign, they say, we are going to do this, and they go and promise the elderly, or the people that are going to be older, we are going to provide health care for you for the rest of your life. And somebody who is 40, 50 years old, and if the politician is saying that, you will vote for him. What will happen 10, 15, 20 years down the line, they cannot meet their obligation. I always take a simple example. Qatar is one, I think, the highest per capita income country in the world. When we designed their healthcare system, they wanted even the best is not good enough for them. We qualified many of what they are asking for. We said, this is not doable. They insisted, they said, but we are consultant. But at least we qualified our report. 7 years down the line, they reformed their system. One of the biggest problems in the world, we have an organization called WHO. And WHO keep talking about healthcare as a human right. And I will always say this is full of shit. Any human right that is monetized is not a human right. Somebody has to pay for it. My freedom of speech is a human right. My freedom of belief is a human right. My freedom from fear is a human right. I want to live in stable life. Everything else is not a human right. You have to pay for it, somebody has to pay for it. You cannot knock on the door and tell the doctor, this is my human right, you have to treat me. In Lebanon, we have a social security system. It excludes owner of companies because it's for workers. I get a salary from my company. I'm not allowed to be in the social security. I'm patron, I'm an employer. So what's human right? That is a system that exists, and it excludes people that I'm willing to pay my contribution. I said no. So this is issues that we have to talk about when we talk about social security and benefit. So let's start looking at some figures, and I'm going to lay the ground. By the way, the paper covers about 60 countries. So who is going to volunteer and all of a sudden figure out a country that is not included in the 60 countries that we have already covered? Maybe we'll have to put a case and to rewind and try to catch up with all the data we have. We start with demographics, then we go to healthcare cost, and then we go back to some kind of indicators that the IMF understand and the world understand, although I object to it. Again, talking about WHO, they rely a lot on healthcare expenditure per country as a percentage of the GDP. And they were the cause of going to Qatar and saying, oh, you only spend 2% on GDP, of GDP per country for healthcare? And the Qataris, sorry to say, they were dumb enough. They want to be like the rest of the world. They wanted to spend more. But realizing that that more was only leaving for corruption. Qatar is 90% of the population of Qatar are expatriates. They come when they are healthy. They're at 20, 25, 30, 35. And unfortunately, they lose their jobs when they are not healthy, so they are shipped back home. So the population is all young people. Of course, they're not going to have healthcare expenditure. And the remaining Qataris are only 3-4% of the population. And it's beautiful if you can see the graph of the pyramid of the population of the UAE and Qatar. 97% of the population are in the bracket between 20 and 30 years old. So GDP as a percentage of healthcare as percentage of GDP is not a good indicator, but for our purposes, because this is the language they understand, we are trying to use that indicator to benchmark countries. Luckily, to the credit of WHO, they have now a very extensive national accounts reports, which really have a lot of data. So national health accounts, you say, I say what I agree with and I say what I don't agree. We are able to find a lot of data. And the United Nations on the population division have a lot of data on the demographics. So for the purpose of today only, I took 3 groups of countries. One group, which is aging population really, such as Italy, Spain, and Germany. Another group is Tanzania and Rwanda. They are what we call the young population, where the average age is 19 and or 21. And then, because I was coming to South America, I put Brazil and Mexico, although they are not really aging and not really young. So it's very interesting comparison. Also for the purpose of only today, although, again, we disagree with the ILO on the projecting of healthcare actuarial work. The ILO, for many, many years, when they did actuarial work for healthcare, they were satisfied with 25 to 30 years projection. Unlike Social Security, which is usually we do 75 or 100 years projection. And their argument is, who knows what the healthcare cost is in the future? So whether you do 30 years or you do 75 years, it's all wrong. Our argument, I would like to be wrong and to see myself as we go along, what did I do wrong so I can correct it? You shouldn't stop at 30 years from now. It's too short, you don't capture the cost of the elderly after they retire. So in this case, I went back 15 years, and then I looked at what we are now, and then I went forward 50 years forward. Now, because there are the 3 slides on different slides, we may not realize the main differences, but let's look at, I jumped from 15 years ago to 50 years ago, and we will see here, Italy, the aging population is only 13% of the total population, whereby we have 30, this is the population, bring on this, okay? Whereby the working population is 40%. Now, this is, we are talking about working population, we're not talking about GDP or anything right now, just to see who is going to be financing what. However, if you look at 50 years later, the aging population is 24%, where now the working population is 21%. We have more people after 64, compared to the people between age 20 and 24. Again, also something that is very weird. The ILO and the United Nations talking about the workforce. They consider a person in the workforce from age 15 to age 64. Because that bracket was designed when people used to go to work at 15. Like my father went to work at age 14. Nowadays, most likely, people don't start before 23 or 24 before they finish universities. So, and that has shortened the years of contributions. My father worked till age 70. I'm 72, I'm still working. Where many people like to retire at 60 or 55 or whatever. So contribution periods are very, very important to see what it is. So I took Italy here, and let's look at Tanzania backward. Look at Tanzania. Tanzania is negligible. The aged population over 64 is 2%. And the working population is 28%. And then if you go forward of Tanzania, you see they are going to be 11%. Now 11% is still low, but it is 5 times the current situation. This 5 times is a big difference when we talk about money. The Italian went from barely 20 to 24. The increase already stable. So financing healthcare for Italy, there's no surprises. Already the population is aging, the numbers are there. My concern in the whole thing is primarily young population countries. The implicit health that will make a big difference when we are talking about the small, young countries, not the stabilized countries that are already low fertility and increasing population. This is the ratios that we can see. If you notice, these ratios that were reasonable 10 years ago, they're still a little bit reasonable for these countries. Even the Italy and other, they increased but not very much, the dependency ratio. However, if you look at it down the line, you are talking about a major changes, and it will bankrupt countries if we don't start taking into consideration what we are going to do about it. Let's start talking about money now.
You got 10 minutes just to
Let's talk about money. This is very sensitive when I told you inflation is age sensitive. We all know cost is age sensitive. But if you build into on over and above the aging, the cost of the aging, and you put the inflation of it, we can start saying that if you notice right now, the Italy $3,300, there's $300 for example, and we go forward, it's going to be $14,000 for the aging per capita. Now, if we go back and look at Tanzania, and we look at the aging 250, 50 years from now, it is 940. So these are the things we are concerned about when we are talking about budgets and countries' financing. Now, we go to what I said, let's link it to the GDP. I don't know if somebody heard me a few days ago talking about when countries run out of budget. And I mentioned that you better not need healthcare in London in November or December, because the NHS would run out of money. You don't treat except emergencies. So you better get sick in the UK between February, March, and October to get a good healthcare. Because these are countries work on budgets. This is not going to continue to be acceptable like that. And they have to reform their system. Many situations where the government have a budget, the first one that they fight for the bigger budgets are usually the defense. And the health budget, it increases, but not at the pace of its needs. So the need is growing by far more than the budget of healthcare provision. Now, in healthcare, as you all know, we are talking about who finances what. You have a public system where the public system provides the healthcare and regulate the healthcare and mismanage the healthcare. Many countries, healthcare providers are hospitals owned by the government. And because they don't take the assets of the buildings into their accounting and the depreciation and everything, they are run down and they manage the provisions correctly, so the comparison the private sector to the healthcare public sector, they don't know, they are not aligned. Their posts are different. Countries where really the private sector are the main providers of healthcare have different situation where countries has hybrid provider of healthcare. So it's really healthcare is quite sophisticated when we come, and this is why I said I have a team of 3 right now working on it, trying to dissect and to really figure out what we are talking about when we are talking about future provisions of healthcare. Again, if we look at 2015, we look at only 2% of the budget, national budget of the GDP, sorry, not budget, 2% of the GDP is healthcare for the elderly, where it's going to be 9%. That is a lot. And since we know they are running out of budget, many countries, what they do, they will reduce the services. The same thing if we look at Tanzania, it is 1% right now, it's going to be 5%. The percentage government have to be responsible about it from now. And this is where we're saying, let's equalize it. Since we know it's going to grow, why don't we start building reserve from now? And this is what we call implicit debt. They have to recognize that promise of the future, because the promise of the future have to be paid by somebody. We all know the elderly will not have salaries, and their pension is barely enough for them to survive, at least in countries that we are talking about. So this is going to be paid from the general budget. So the general budget should have to put that, recognize that implicit health debt is not a debt. It is a calculation of a promise, the price of a promise. And this is why in many countries right now, implicit health debt is put off balance sheet, but is recognized. When it is recognized, it will show the country is in debt. So they have to figure out how they move forward. This slide, I've used it many, many times to show pension actuaries that are complaining about the sophistication of pricing and doing actuarial work of defined benefit plans. I'm telling, wait a minute, you better look at the complexity of the health plans. And defined benefits is a joke compared to health benefits, because defined benefit, the benefit is linked to the duration of the contribution, linked to the salaries, linked to things that are identifiable, although there is a lot of assumptions, but are easily identifiable. In healthcare, you can't tell somebody, oh, you contributed 17 years, you get only 15% of the benefit from the person that contributed 25 years. If your salary was $3,000 and the person's salary is $4,000, you don't tell the guy, oh, you get more benefit in healthcare than other benefit. So healthcare is not salary sensitive. Healthcare is not contribution sensitive. Healthcare has different inflation, and so on and so forth. This is the sophistication of healthcare when we are telling actuaries doing healthcare provisions, they should really put a lot of thought in healthcare compared to pension. I always like to say the World Bank, about 30 years ago, when they went into pushing into the Chile model, trying to move from the DB to DC, I speak at the World Bank events and say, wait a minute, what are you going to push? What I call undefined benefit, which is the healthcare. I mean, defined benefit, you found a solution for it, and to escape from that liability, you moved into DC plans. How can you escape from the liability, what we call healthcare, what I call undefined benefit? So we have a lot of debate that should take place talking about what do we promise the future and how we're going to finance for it. I would like to open for the discussions if we have any questions. Whoever is interested, I think I put my, I have my email here, and you see my bow tie. And feel free to drop me a note if anybody like to volunteer or partially volunteer or debate the subject matter. Our target is to finish the paper before the end of the year. So thank you very much in advance.
Any questions for you? Any questions? All right, Ibrahim, thank you very much.
Thank
Very
you.
intriguing discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you.